on Iron Age in Coorg Plateau, Karnataka. In the last talk, Dr. Arjun had covered the Iron Age or megalithic cultures in Kerala. In continuation to it, because owing to the similar or same geographical, owing to the same and geographical regions of the Western Ghats, if you come further into the south of what Dr. Arjun spoke, we will also find similar as well as some distinctive megalithic features that tells us the story of Iron Age cultures. So this is in view of, I mean, the whole talk will be very particular on the Iron Age or megalithic sites of the Coorg Plateau. So when it comes to the Iron Age in the Indian subcontinent, the Iron Age in the Indian subcontinent has shown an immense regional differences in terms of settlements, in terms of transition from the Iron Age to the early history, in terms of rapid urbanization process. And there is also similarity and dissimilarity in the kinds of megalithic burials that are dispersed across the Indian subcontinent. There are few similar and identical or common things that goes around. That is the iron tools, iron objects, iron technology, and the practice of megalithism or the belief that was there there from the people on regards to the after death probably, or honoring the death. So megaliths are very much common in all the geographical zones that are shown on the map, except the upper and lower Ganga plains. Further research probably into the trans-Himalayan regions will also bring into the new evidences. Whereas if you look at the northeastern part of India, there also megaliths have shown various characteristic features that owe to the different time period, and it is continuing even till today. So the megalithic practices are, speaking in very general, there are megalith practices that are evident even today in different parts of the Indian subcontinent or Asia or in any old world regions as well. So to the larger extent, if you look at the Iron Age studies, the Deccan Plateau, particularly the central and southern part of the Deccan Plateau of the peninsula, owing to the catchment areas or the valleys of Krishna, Tungabhadra, and Kaveri down up to, there are probably we can say that there are thousands of megalithic sites. And these megalithic sites may belong to the transitional period from the Neolithic to Iron Age or Iron Age proper, or the transitional period from Iron Age to the early history. And if you particularly focus in the middle and the lower Kaveri basin, there the megaliths also were existence during the early historic period down up to the 5th century Common Era. Overall, if you look at the dates, the oldest dates are somewhat coming from the central Deccan, where from the sites such as Maski and Brahmagiri, dating back to the 18th and 19th century before Common Era. So this can be a benchmark for the beginning of beginning of Iron Age cultures. Probably not as what we see as the beginning of the iron technology itself, but megalithism, the practice of honoring the dead, the mortuary practices, and the mortuary practices associated with the lithic appendages can securely go back to probably perhaps 18th to 17th century BCE, and it becomes very clear by 12th century and 10th century before Common Era. So therefore, there is still a long way to go into the megalithic studies and Iron Age studies, but owing to the large number of Iron Age sites in Indian subcontinent, we are very much dwelling into the basics. And of course, there are exceptional studies in various sites across the Indian subcontinent that has given us various data on the settlement pattern, their society, their conceptualization of politics and economy, their landscapes, and retrieving the radiometric dates. And one of the key features of Iron Age cultures is that it becomes very clear that intensive agricultural activities, owing to the kind of subsistence economy, including the pastoralism, is very, very clear, because they are in these traditions, these practices becomes in continuation with the Neolithic period. And again, it also has a different regional context. So my main focus is on the Western Ghats. Western Ghats, particularly, if you want to categorize into certain geographical areas, it can be broadly classified into three zones. One is the northern part of the Western Ghats, covering the parts of, covering the entire state of Maharashtra. And when it comes to Karnataka part of Western Ghats, it is also called as the central part of the Western Ghats, and Kerala falls into the southern part of the Western Ghats. Now, the Western Ghats, I don't have to go in detail into the geology of the Western Ghats, but in a very short statement, I can say that the Western Ghats particularly in the northern part, is dominated by the basalt. The central Western Ghats are dominate. I mean, there are formation. There you can see the formation of granite, as well as when crossing, looking towards the western slopes of the Western Ghats, particularly in the regions of Goa, Karnataka, and Kerala, the laterite formations are common. So this is a very brief understanding of Western Ghats. And Western Ghats, as you know, is it's a biological hub, as well as ecologically very rich in area. It receives, it has a tropical climate, tropical forest, evergreen forest, and Western Ghats is joined by a number of rivers and rivulets. So the overall understanding is that when we compare to the other climatic regions of the neighborhood, that is the semi-arid regions of northern Karnataka, or savanna of southern Karnataka, or savanna of the parts of Tamil Nadu, is something that differs from the geographical understanding. And therefore, there is also some differences that you've also seen in the distribution of cultural sites here. So Coorg Plateau is a small area that is identical to the present districts of the Kodagu. It is called. The literature mentions the region as Kodagu, and Coorg becomes the anglicized version that recently got its momentum. Now, this Coorg Plateau, I hope you can see, we can follow the cursor. Here is the Coorg Plateau. If you look at the surrounding regions of the Coorg Plateau, to the north we have the Baba Gudangari supergroups, where Sahyadri and further is evident. To the south of Coorg Plateau is the region of Wayanad and Nilgiris. To the southeast of the Coorg Plateau, you have the range of Satyamangalam forest or Biligiri hills, and to the west of Coorg Plateau, to the east of Coorg Plateau, is the Mysore tablelands, or it is also called as Mysore Plateau. So owing to the flow of the river Kaveri in the upper reaches, the Kaveri river is one of a very predominant peninsular river, and it originates from the Talakaveri in the Coorg Plateau and flows into almost 800 kilometers before it reaches its delta in Tamil Nadu. So therefore, when we say the upper reaches of Kaveri, that means it includes the Coorg Plateau or Kodagu district of the present administrative boundaries, and the Mysore district as well. So broadly speaking, when we speak about the upper Kaveri, these are the two geographical regions that comes on the map. Now, why I am stressing on Kaveri, or particularly upper Kaveri, is that because in the later discussion, somewhere we will try to understand that how archaeological sites differ when you travel from the lower reaches to upper reaches or vice versa, because the upper reaches of Kaveri is what that I'm speaking in the middle reaches of the Kaveri, where the Bilagiri Hills, it cuts through the Bilagiri Hills and Mettur area of Coimbatore. There, beginning from there to the further downstream, you will start getting a lot of large number of Iron Age sites, megalithic sites, and early historic sites, and they get referred contextually or in the social dynamics or in the economic dynamics. They somewhat also get referred in the Sangam literature or in the discussions of Indo-Roman trade. So therefore, it clearly distinguishes how we are looking into the different stages, the different catchment areas of Kaveri as well, because there is a lot of landscape changes and there is also large scale cultural influences that is happening. We cannot say whether it is coming from northern Karnataka or northern Andhra Pradesh or southern Karnataka, but this geographical distinction is very much clear in the studies of the megalithic sites of the Iron Age period. So just a view for you to familiarize how this Coorg Plateau looks. It's a very picturesque landscape. It is also one of the hotspot for tourism, where people come to enjoy the sceneries, and it has owed much to the accounts of ecotourism. The Coorg, this view of the Coorg Plateau suggests that the thick density of tropical evergreen forest, which receives rainfall reaching up to 3,000 millimeters per annum. So it is completely evergreen, and the landscape formation is something that you have high hills that can reach up to 3,500 feet. Now, this is one part of Coorg Plateau which is very much known for its scenery. But in fact, look, if you go deeper into the Coorg Plateau, there you can see two geographical or ecological zones. Text as well as the people in the Coorg Plateau, they are familiar with the two terms. One is Malenadu, the other is Kanivenadu. Now, these two are very much interesting, and somewhat these kind of two different ecological zones are also referred in the legend text or epic text called Kaveri Puranas. I will not go detail into the Kaveri Purana, but these two ecological zones, Malenadu and Kanivenadu, are clearly mentioned, and even today the landscapes as well as the climate has not much changed. For your reference, the ecology, the paleoecology, the paleoclimate, the landscape formations, and what you experience about the Western Ghats has remained more or less similar until recent. So our understanding is that it has the Coorg Plateau has witnessed heavy rainfall, heavy landslides, and there were recurrent flash floods occurring through the river Kaveri, and that is what we can understand from the paleoclimatic studies and geomorphological studies as well. So Malenadu is a mountain forest evergreen and deciduous region. For example, you can see the cursor. The landscapes somehow look like this, and the photograph is almost taken from above 3,500 feet from the sea level. On the right side, you have Kanivenadu, where the forests are somewhat scantily, and it is covered in the form of scrubs, short trees, grass, and these are lower hill ranges and passes where we can see the trees of bamboo plants, blackwood, matti, agony, teak, sandalwood, and various other. So the understanding here is that how if you look at the prehistory or later prehistory, what is the status quo of cultural evidences in the Malenadu as well as Kanivenadu is very crucial. Now, if you look at, if you see the Uh, if you are entering the Coorg Plateau from the eastern sides, that is going through the Mysore region and entering into the Coorg Plateau, first we will start passing through number of passages and sorry, pass number of passes, and these passes are usually low elevated hill ranges, and it and a kind of vegetation is somewhat scrub kind of vegetation, whereas gradually when you cross the river Kaveri and enters into the current towns like Kushalnagar and up to the Madikeri hill range, it becomes very clear that the density of forest as well as the kind of ecological scenery also changes. So, Kaveri river could be considered in a very predominant way how possibly the people were entering into the Western Ghats, and one of the route could possibly be the banks of the river Kaveri entering Coorg Plateau through the Mysore. On the outset, there are other passages as well. For example, the passes in Wayanad or the passes near the Chikmagalur in the north. So there are a number of passes where passages that can connect into the Coorg Plateau, and to the west of the Coorg Plateau is the west coast of India, where you enter into the present districts of Kasargod, Mangalore, or Dakshina Kannada. So there, this is out of the geological settings of the Coorg Plateau can be understood. Just a minute, I have some problem with the slides. Okay, there was some slide problem. The slides are back now. Yeah. So these are the two ecological zones, and there is one more that has got to be identified in this region is the grassy glades, where the dialect says bane or a bane. Now, dense here you can almost see like a garden kind of a landscape. The background that you see is very much recent, where there are plantations of uh, agony and commercial plants for the sake of hood commerce or hood trade. So apart from these kind of background sceneries, the natural landscape is somewhat very familiar, similar to the Malenadu or Kanivenadu and the grasslands. The kind of climate, if you look at the climate of the Coorg Plateau, it is extreme because there is always a humidity throughout the year, and the humidity is precipitated either in the forms of dense mist or in the form of rain. The maximum temperature that can go up to is 26 to 30 degree, and the lowest temperature in the temperature can fall up to 4 degrees centigrade or 5 degrees centigrade, and hence some people view that Madikeri is the Scotland of India, mainly owing to the very cool, precipitated and humid kind of climate that is there. June to July is where southwest monsoon brings dense clouds and heavy precipitation up to 3,500 millimeters in annum. This precipitation is also very interesting in the Coorg Plateau because the western part of the Coorg Plateau, where the hills rise up to the maximum elevation, there the precipitation is higher. And it is that region in the central and the western part of the Coorg where number of rivers, including Kaveri, takes its origin, and the precipitation becomes a source for the various rivulet discharges, often often cutting into the ridges and forming very beautiful waterfalls. So December is usually foggy. November is something that the northeast winds carry massive clouds from the eastern coast. So Throughout the year, it's humid, and the region witnesses all kind, a severe kind of uh, climates. Now, why I'm emphasizing on this is the very idea is that how the prehistoric people or the Iron Age people or, for example, the early historic people could have lived in this kind of dense forest. Because working in the semi-arid regions of northern Karnataka is something that makes me to think, or a kind of it brings me kind of imagination that when the prehistoric and early historic people lived in the semi-arid regions, various concepts, various theories are now developed by the working of number of scholars from India, Europe, and America. So the very basic question is how possibly the prehistoric people could have lived in the Western Ghats. Is it eco-friendly for the prehistoric people having with the minimum cranial capacity with the initial stage of cultural evolution? So recently there was some clippings, clippings or stories on emphasizing why there are no sites or potential sites that can take us to long antiquity like that in the other regions when you compare to the Western Ghats or the Coorg Plateau. I think these are some of the questions, because these are some of the questions will gradually lead to addressing to social formation, economy, and how the subsistence foraging of the natural resources could have managed by the people who lived here. So Kaveri is something very important. It's not just owing to the today's politics. Anyhow, that is not relevant here. In the nutshell, to say that Kaveri is Kaveri throughout its catchment, throughout its discharge from the origin to the delta, the river has played a very significant role in the past as well as in the present population to sustain. Now, it gives me one reference to the legend. Now, why I am telling this legend is that the next map will tell you. The Kaveri Purana or the legend says that for the temple that you are viewing is recent. It has nothing to do with our talk with the Iron Age. But the legend says that the legend connects with the Rama in exile, where Rama, Sita, and Lakshmana, they were in exile. They were wandering into the forest. So if you rightly understand the legend, it says that they were crossing from east to the west bank of Kaveri. That is, from the tablelands of Mysore and entering into the hills or valleys of the Coorg Plateau. So what it says is that they crossed from the east bank to the west bank, and they resided in the west bank. Probably they took camp for the overnight. On the next day, when they started to proceed towards the further west, that is, they want to go deeper into the jungles of the Coorg Plateau. Now, the legend says is that people advised them not to enter into this forest because there are large number of streams, rivulets, waterfalls, and the rivers. And entering into these valleys is something is very difficult to leave as well as to cross over the region. Now, why I'm saying is, if you look at the watershed or hydrology map of the Coorg Plateau, for example, it is very clear that throughout the Coorg Plateau, streams, rivulets, and the major rivers have played they are very dominative in the Coorg Plateau, and they forms a very wet climate there. This is, if you are able to see the Coorg, this is the channel of Kaveri. It origins from the Bhagamandala at almost height of 5,000 feet above sea level. Then it flows into the number of valleys, forming gorges and waterfalls, and gradually it enters into it exits from the valleys and enters into somewhat relatively Kanive Nadu. This river is Harangi, and it confluence here at near to the Kushal Nagara. So these are two important rivers, and they are very much important for our discussions in the coming slides. John Cameron, the book on the forest tribes and forest tribes of Mysore and Coorg is something that is a very novel and monumental work, where he has worked on large number of trees or forest ecology that is evident in the Coorg and Mysore, particularly the Coorg. When it comes to Mysore, Mysore was an autonomous state under the Maharajas. When it comes to the Coorg and Coorg Plateau, it was under the then Madras presidency. So when it comes to the domesticated crops, there are large number of kinds of crops, including the millets, African millets, or ragi, paddy, rice, teak, pepper, plantain or banana musa, cardamom, and coffee. Of course, some of the vegetation, some of the plants or trees mentioned are recent, and they were introduced during the colonial period for the commercial gain. Now, what is very much interesting for us to study here is that the millets, the paddy, plantain, musa, and the cardamoms, pepper, and it all fits into very much very understanding of the spice in the Western Ghats, or the trade associated with the spice. So paddy is a staple food as well as staple crop in the Coorg Plateau, and I was mentioning you that near very closer to the Kaveri River, as well as in the Malenadu kind of forest, paddy cultivation is common, whereas millets are grown in the Kanivenadu, where it's a where there is a landscape of dry shrubs or grassy lands. So therefore, proceeding further, exiting from the Coorg Plateau, entering into the Mysore Plateau, ragi, cultivation of ragi will become a staple and predominant crop. So there is some understanding behind it when we look into the further slides. If you look at the work of Krishna Iyer on the Coorg tribes and castes, it details on various ethnic groups and the demographic features of the local population. So what interests me here is that he as well as the later gazetters mentions about the aboriginal tribes. Now, aboriginal tribes in the region of Coorg Plateau cannot be viewed in a very strict sense. The aboriginal tribes, the movement of these tribes or the origin of these tribes is very uncertain, and they can also, the roots can also go into the regions of Wayanadu in Kerala. So being Wayanadu and Coorg Plateau neighborhood and adjoining areas of the Western Ghats, the movement of aboriginal tribes was common. Probably now it may not be common because of the state administrative boundaries or the forest acts, etc. So there we have three predominant kind of tribes: Yarava, Kuruba, and Malekudia. In the Kuruba, there are two sects: Jenu Kuruba and Betta Kuruba. Now, if you look at the ethnographic aspects of these tribes, it clearly says that, because we are trying to understand the habitation, occupation, and funeral practices of these people, because we have a fundamental question: how the people could live and what is their occupation and what are the practices. Under the practices, I have taken limited data on funeral practices. What we understand from looking at all these four groups of predominant tribes in the Coorg Plateau is that some are wandering tribes, some are seasonal camp tribes, some are settled tribes. And their settlements, their habitation is mainly of fragile or earthen and botanical materials by using bamboo or other tree trunks, interwoven for the construction of walls. Bamboo are interwoven and plastered with muds, and it is very common that we very frequently say probably they lived in a thatched huts of made up of reeds and bamboo. So similarly, the habitation is more or less same by using the bamboo, the mud plastering, and the perishable materials. And their hamlets, or the hadi, what we say, are smaller in size, and they are clustered, and they are very closely clustered. When you look at their occupation, they are agriculturists, they are foragers, and very importantly, they forage for honey. mountain honey. They called hedgenu and rockhill. So therefore, their foraging is very much akin to the honey collection. And also, probably a few years ago, they were also very good in foraging wild animals, hunting wild animals, foraging wild fruits or nuts or the or the products of the trees. One more important profession that we see is the toddy drawers. The Malayakudia tribes, their profession is mainly focused on palm trees and the toddy that comes out of that palms. When you look at the funeral practices, here also, which is very much common, is the rice. So rice, the offering of rice, whether it could be in the form of deposition or it could be on the deposit, whether it could be in the form of deposition into the pots or the kind of vessels or containers, or the offering of rice by splitting or covering over the dead is very, very common. Why I'm stressing on rice is that if you look at the all the excavated burials in the Coorg Plateau, there is a common botanical remains, that is rice. And rice cultivation is something that is very, very ancient here. I should also mention here that the archaeobotanical evidences from the Neolithic and Iron Age sites of the northern Karnataka and northern part of Andhra Pradesh clearly says that initially it was dry crops, and later in the transitional stages and in the Iron Age and the Iron Age period, the rice cultivation was introduced. I will not get into the details of how the rice, the movement of rice or the movement of musa or banana in this discussion. Probably it needs a very detailed discussion in particular later. But to our understanding, it is very much clear that almost all the burials that are excavated in Coorg Plateau, in the pots of the red jars or the legged jars or the black and red ware, their rice grains or paddy husk, at least in the form of paddy husk, carbonized grains are evident. So Professor Kajle from the Deccan College, he examined the samples of rice from one of the megalithic burial at Koppa, which was excavated in 1970s by the University of Mysore. The samples were sent to the Deccan College laboratory, and Professor Kajle already had an experience of looking at the botanical remains from the megaliths of Vidarbha. So it was very much clear with his experience and the examination of paddy husk and sprinklets. It clearly said that these are cultivated specimens, and dehusking of the paddy grains were probably occurred very much outside the site, and it was very much common that rice was a part of the grave offerings. There are a couple of very good kind of literature available to understand the demography of the Coorg, such as the Coorg Memoirs, such as the journey from Madras, Mysore, Kannada, and Malabar. So these are some of the references probably you can look into for a detailed understanding of the demography of Coorg. Now I will come into a proper archaeological study or proper archaeological understanding with a background of ecology and with a background of environment that is there in the Coorg Plateau. As I mentioned, there is a lot of concentration on focus that had occurred on studying the megaliths of South India, and particularly the Nilgiris and the Coorg Plateau are in the foremost. And the another focus was in the regions of the Shorapura Dawab in the northern Karnataka by Meadows Taylor, obviously a little bit contemporarily as well as later. So in the Coorg Plateau, we have very predominant excavations occurred. As you know, the colonial excavations were not in terms of systematic excavations, but we can say that they were all opening of the burials out of curiosity and to know what lies beneath, as well as to probably they also later gave their best try to understand what are these cultural materials and how these cultural materials are important to the antiquity of India, or writing history of India. So the earliest, the first excavations were conducted by Mogling at the Almanda House, where he was on some missionary he was on some missionary responsibility appointed by the Queen from England. So he opened a dolmen, which is called as Cromwich. Now from there, the study begins from the Coorg Plateau. The next important excavations were made in Virajpete by Lieutenant Mackenzie in 1868, and he continued his work down up to further 2 more years. Now the excavations from Virajpete, particularly he was opening the dolmens, which they called as Cromwich. Cyst burials, cyst circle kind of varieties were called as Kistavans. So when dolmens were opened, it was the grave boots were very much similar that what we know today about the megalithic graves in the in the Kerala or in the southern Deccan. So this gave an earliest platform for the opening of the burials. The next very serious kind of discussions followed by opening of large number of burials was started from Captain Coorg. Now, Captain R.A. Cole was a superintendent in the region of Fraser Pit. Now, Fraser Pit is today's Kushal Nagra. It got a name Fraser Pit because of the Fraser administrator called Fraser. So he was looking into this region, and later the town got its name called Fraser Pit. And before that, it was also called as Kushal Nagra. And even today, the Kushal Nagra is said that the name Kushal Nagra came because of an incident of Hyder Ali, where when he was on the fort of Kushal Nagra, he will receive a good news stating that Tipu was born to him, and therefore he named it as Kushal Nagra. That means the place of good news. So that is how Kushal Nagra came. So in the records, in the colonial records, if you are looking at the colonial records, you should look for Fraser Pit, and later 19th century records will mention about Kushal Nagra, and they are mentioning about the same reasons. Now, Captain R.A. Cole, on the bank of the river Kaveri, public work departments were working there, including the making of roads and construction of bridges. The people, he very clearly states that he employed the wadders. Now, in the sense that wadders are a community where their occupation is predominantly working on masonry or breaking the stones or quarrying the stones. Their occupation is mainly centered around the rocks. So, what this community during the construction, what they did is they started to exploit the slabs, the boulders from the megalithic burials very close to the public works where it was carried out. For example, construction road. So it was reported to Mackenzie, and Mackenzie will report to the Captain R.A. Cole. And see, we should appreciate the time sense or the sense of Captain R.A. Cole. He didn't take much time to decide on giving a special emphasis not to destroy these burials for the sake of construction, and immediately he took over the excavations and the excavated materials. The report was reported to the higher authorities, to his superiors, and therefore, if you look at the proceedings of Asiatic Society of Bengal of 1868 and 1869, it is a wonderful conversation that is happening between R.A. Cole, Oldham, Mackenzie, and others. The whole conversation is that what are these burials? Whose burials are these? What are these grave goods? What could be the history? What could be the date? How to understand the history, local history of these people? Because 1868 was already time where megaliths in Vidarbha, megaliths in northern Karnataka, megaliths in the eastern part of Tamil Nadu were already reported, and therefore it was. I suggest that if possible, read the proceedings of Asiatic Society of Bengal. There is a wonderful conversation going on, and at the end of the day, they come to an understanding that these burials, these dolmens and cyst burials, belongs to the community who lived in the Coorg Plateau, dating back to probably 200 years to 300 years. So the the understanding of the antiquity of these cultural materials is not something extraordinary, because today today with the chance of large scale research and better technologies and discussions, we are arrived to the dating methods. So their understanding is that these burials will go back to 200 years. There were people, there were tribes. The tribes were particularly Wadders, because these people, only these people know how to work on rocks, how to extract rocks and construct the burials. So Cole also very clearly mentions that iron objects, iron tools, iron implements, along with the black and red ware, red liquid ware, legged jars that are all filled with, that contained carbonized ragi or carbonized paddy, and the skeletal remains of secondary nature, particularly the fragile skeleton of humans as well as the ash, and mixed with charcoal, were the common, very, very common kind of evidences that are found in the megaliths. And even today, it will not surprise us that even today, if you excavate any parts of the southern peninsula, the grave goods are common. One thing is that he particularly mentioned about the beads, but he was not very much acquainted to work on the beads, on the various questions associated with the beads. Whereas the question of beads comes in the works of K.K. Subbaiah in 1978, and the excavations at Heggade by the State Archaeology Department and University of Mysore. So what they did is, K.K. Subbaiah, what they did is they revisited the burial sites that are mentioned by, particularly by Captain R.A. Cole, and they started the re-excavations mainly to understand, to re-understand or reinterpret, to record the burial features, possibly the grave goods, possibly also to study the cultural materials in detail. So so therefore we can see two waves of research here. One is from 1870s, sorry, 1850s to 1870s, during the colonial period, who are in the administrative capacities, and the second wave comes in the 1960s to 1990s. So yes, this is what I was mentioning, that the Mysore, they reach, if you look at the eastern part of east of the Coorg Plateau, it is Mysore tableland, and the upper Kaveri regions are part of the Coorg Plateau. I will not go details into this. Captain Coorg excavated the sites, megalithic burials at Virajpete. Today it is Virajpete district. Then he excavated Fraserpet, which is nothing but Kushalnagra, and the actual site is Koppa. Koppa is something that was excavated later by the State Archaeology Department and others, including Kaveri. So to get into some details, these kind of cromlechs or double chambered dolmens were excavated by Captain R.A. Cole, and he also mentions about wide varieties of dolmens, particularly double chambered with double portholes, single chambered with a single portholes, and the deposition of grave goods, which are very common in all kind of burials. It could be dolmens or it could be cyst burials. Yeah, this is a sketch drawing by Captain Cole. So he very much emphasized on the iron objects that are mentioned here, and therefore it started to gain a lot of momentum. Some detail is required to look into the works of K.K. Subbaiah. It is an elaborate work. K.K. Subbaiah did his PhD from the Deccan College, and he published, he submitted his thesis, Archaeology of Coorg, with special reference to megaliths, and later he published the book as well. So the thesis has a lot of raw data and original data related to the excavations at Heggade. When it comes to the archaeology of Coorg later publication, it has reference to both the site of Heggade, Moribetta, and the Koppa. So these are some of the specimens. Three-legged red slipper jar, which has both which comes in two varieties: elongated, elongated as well as short stature in the body, conical shaped vessels, and beads very much. The beads are particularly carnelian beads, which are of each category. So, in the excavations of Heggedehulli, he also says that the pit burials are common. It's not just dolmens and cyst burials, as told by Captain Arjun. One of the adding evidences by the later work is that the pit burials. The pit burials were very much on the elaborate scale, and they were also in larger number as well. If you look at the figure 7 from the extract of Subaya, it is very clear that the kind of grave goods were also larger in number, and it contained all the common necessaries. In the case of pit burials, so two kind of varieties you can see. One is the skeletal remains, the extended skeletal remains as a primary burial, as well as the pit burials can also be the deposition of the secondary remains. So three-legged jars from the later excavations, and black and red ware, bowls, varieties, and graffiti were also common on the potteries of the megaliths of the Coorg. And one of the finest examples for the conical shape of the vessels comes from the Coorg as well. These were the recent excavations that occurred in 1980s and 1990s, where very fortunately this has been well preserved by the University of Mysore, the Department Museum of History and Archaeology, Ancient History and Archaeology. We are still very lucky to see these materials: three-legged jars, vessels of red slipper, and flat axes or flat iron axes, daggers, arrowheads, etc. So with this background, I will try to connect. I will try to come into the recent studies. Since 2012, revisiting and working on the Coorg megaliths, particularly in the transitional geographies of areas from Coorg Plateau to Mysore Plateau on the river banks of Kaveri is focused, and where the works of 2012 to 2014 had resulted in not only revisiting number of sites mentioned, particularly Koppa by the R.A. Cole and excavations of later period. And it shows that the primary objective of the initial studies in this region were to look into the site preservation, to look into the landscape features, to try to understand on geospatial aspects. So this is the general view of possibly a pit burial enclosed by stone circles on the small elevated hillocks in Koppa. So different kinds of burials were examined. For example, cyst burials, pit burials, and the pit burials enclosed by stone circles, and capstone burials, which are again enclosed by the stone circles. Probably in the subsurface, it will be the pit, if I am right. So the initial understanding of the site of Koppa on the bank of Kaveri, if you see here, this is the partial view of the river Kaveri. This is the town of Kushalnagar, and on the eastern bank there is a small village called Koppa, where it is referred since the Captain R.A. Cole. So Captain Cole gives an elaborate description. If you go according to his description, the highway or the road and the hamlet that we see today were originally a burial site. And today the site is confined to smaller regions in the further eastern boundaries of the Koppa site, where it was, when the landscape analysis was done, it is understood that the burials concentrations were particularly on the very, very low elevated hillocks. It is such a low elevated. For example, if you compare to the surrounding levels, hardly 10 to 15 meters from the surrounding plains were the preferred areas for the erection or the construction of the burials. Of course, owing to today's agriculture, the elevation, the current elevation could have been much more, probably added to further 1 feet or 1 meter. So in general, it was understood that the burials are very much concentrated on the hillocks, on the low elevated hillocks. And further study in site-centric study in Koppa gave different evidences of there are a number of localities, associated localities that substantiated habitation remains, that substantiated slag iron working localities, and that also substantiated the cluster of burials closer to the large burials. Now, the megalithic sites in the region of discussion, they are all large number of sites. If you look at right from the old reports to the present, even today when the Coorg surveyed, it was understood that these are all large scale burials. There are no small numbered burials, or there are no isolated burials. For example, Coorg records about 1,500 burials in Koppa. Subaya records more than 2,000 megalithic burials in Heggade and surroundings. So like that, this also remembers me the megalithic sites in Vidarbha. Even in Vidarbha, all the sites that are popularly known in Vidarbha are large-scale burials. Large number of burials are there. In the same way here also, the number of burials in the site are very, very large. And even today, we can easily trace up to 100 to 200 burials in a site, in addition to the common destructions occurred by the locals. So in Koppa, when we were working, some materials were extracted from different localities. There, for the very first time in this region, evidence of microliths on quartz and quartz, particularly quartz of crystal quartz category, were very much evident. Some slags are also found, and pot sherds of red slipwood, probably a dull black and red ware kind of varieties were also recovered. The pot sherds were very rare to find in this kind of landscape. I will come to the next slides about the landscape set formations. So these kind of materials were found, and very importantly, some nodules of diorite were found with the traces of chalcopyrite and laterite layers, which can also be extracted for the iron, for melting of iron. Possibly these nodules were closely associated, maybe by chance or by activity. They were closely associated with the smelting of iron, where the slags were also collected, and some traces of iron minerals as well as in a smelt form were collected. So with these kind of evidences, when we look at the landscape of the Koppa site, here an habitation space was traced near to the burial space, and habitations are usually not closer to the burial space in this region as far as my experience is concerned. Maybe it can be having different reasons. So four localities were found of different activity sites. It could be constructing megaliths, habitation, slags, and microliths as well. So all these activities were commonly associated with, as much as possible, at the higher elevations, not at the base of the elevations or not at the base of the valleys. They are all found in the closely distributed higher elevations. For example, if you can see here, the kind of variations that are there: locality 2, locality 1, habitation space, and the burial. The main site of burial of Koppa is definitely at the higher elevation. So this is just a matter of elevation ranging from 830 meters to 855 meters. It is hardly a range of 20 to 25 meters. It's not very broad, not very large in elevations. So with these kind of evidences, it gave further boost for me to take into higher level of researchers, and therefore in 2016 Koppa Archaeological Research Project was undertaken. The project was designed in such a way that both the east bank and this east and west bank of the river Kaveri will be covered, and a region of about 120 square kilometers was marked, which has maximum landscape feature, high hills, low elevated areas. It could be Malenadu, it could be Kanivenadu. It could be the main river channel of 22-kilometer discharge within the study area, or it could be the streams and rivulets, or it could be the passages. So 120 square kilometer of area was marked to get into the systematic and intensive explorations to be conducted. So now the further owing to the evidences or outcome of COPPA work, further goals were developed. The predominant goals of CARP are, the COPPA Archaeological Research Project are, to conduct a systematic documentation of prehistoric and early historic sites and look into the cultural landscapes and the nature of settlements in the Western Ghats. The second one is to possibly obtain radiometric dates and establish a multi-culture sequence in this region that will be also identical to the Western Ghats or the Coorg Plateau. To work on the subsistence and population models by processing distinct categorical data obtained by various excavations. So in a nutshell, the whole focus is on what kind of cultural sites that we have in this study area, or to look into to establish the multi-period, multicultural nature of the study area, and also to look into how possibly the economy, the socio-politics, the social theories, or the society could have been developed very importantly in the tropical regions, because we have bulk of the data coming from the northern parts of Karnataka, where all these works have been done by various scholars till recent. But the very predominant understanding is what is the case of the cultural sequence in the Western Ghats. So all this become a primary goal of the CARP, and therefore 120 square kilometers of area were subjected to a transect survey with a number of transect lines. And in this transect survey, we were able to cover about 85% of the study area. The rest of the 15% of the study area were not able to survey because of forest area reservations, as well as the modern hamlets, towns, and other areas which were not accessible due to the animal reserved regions. So 85% of the areas out of 121 square kilometers were surveyed, and as I mentioned, the study area was something that is very tough landscape. These are the elevation graph of transect lines on which we explored on each and every lines. And if you look at the graphs, it becomes very clear that the elevation goes up to 910 and drops up to 1830 at the channels of Kaveri. In a very short term, it is a very, very tough landscape of different elevation, different geographical features, and different kind of trees and grasses. So what was common is that despite of differences in the kind of landscapes within the study area, they were not able to show any difference in the kind of sites that are formed. So almost 2 years of explorations in the regions of CARP study area, we were able to study sites, we were able to study landscapes at the macro level, we were able to study how the settlement expansions could have happened. These are the survey points, crucial survey points that are recorded for both geocultural features. So more detail about the methods employed in this survey can be seen in this publication. So the outcome, to be telling in a very shorter way, the outcome of all these explorations of CARP is that we were able to identify 38 archaeological sites. Out of it, 26 are megalithic sites, 6 were burial sites that were previously excavated either by K.K. Subbaya or Captain Coorg. And very importantly, one of the objective of Karp was to what is the status quo of the habitation sites in this region. So 12 habitation sites were discovered, and out of 12, most of the habitation sites were closely associated or closely located with the burial sites. Now again, we should take a very conscious look at this. I mean to say these habitation sites were temporarily, spatially closer to the megalithic sites. It may not guarantee the contemporary lifespan of the habitation site with the megalithic sites or the vice versa. But still, the habitation sites, with the evidence of typical Iron Age varieties of ceramics, slags, and microliths were found in this region. So I will just show you some slides about the megalithic types. We have menhirs. Menhirs are common of different sizes. They come from the very small size to the larger sizes. And if you go with the older records, these menhirs are associated, or they are also found with various other types of megaliths. But during the Karp survey, we understood that the menhir sites that we discovered were isolated. I mean, no other types of megaliths were found. Probably this could also be due to the agricultural expansion, or we might have lost the other kind of evidences associated with the megaliths. In this case, megaliths, the understanding of the localites of the megaliths here, particularly the menhirs, is that the people believe that the larger one was an elephant stable, whereas the next to the larger one, the smaller menhir, the smaller as well as shorter menhir, was a stable for horse. Now that is the local understanding. We can't throw much light on linking with whether it belongs to the Iron Age or it belongs to the recent period or to the traditions that the people believed. But to our understanding, this can go back to the megalithic sites of like that others. So some few common smaller size menhirs are also found in the fields, cairn burials on the hilltops, dolmens. This region is popularly known for the passage kind of dolmens. For example, like this passage tombs, where there are a number of passages. For example, here there are 2 consecutive passages along with the regular dolmen, upright and capstone. Cyst circles are most extensive kind of burials, and they were largely excavated by many of the pre-war excavators. And what we understand by this is the cysts are very, very larger in scale. The cyst can extend up to 7 to 8 feet into the ground. So the cysts are heavy cyst and large cyst. And very interestingly, at the base of the cyst burial, there will be a floor slab. That floor slab is something that is extraordinary in dimensions, and it is also found in some of the excavations here. So I hope you see what I am trying to imagine out of this. Probably a lateral view of a face of a lizard. So these kind of anthropomorphs are also found. Coming to the occupational remains, our understanding of occupational remains is limited to evidence of microliths, combination of evidences such as microliths, potsherds, ringstones, and ringstones. These ringstones are on granite, and probably this may, in my opinion, it may not indicate at the Neolithic sequence or Neolithic context. There is no necessity to put this into the Neolithic context owing to the ringstone in the agricultural activities, but still these kind of ringstones are also found. Now, when you look at the landscapes of habitation sites as well as megalithic sites, they are usually reported from the foothills. But the Karp also brings rock shelter sites that substantiate Iron Age material evidences at the highest elevation level. So these kind of low elevated hills or low elevated outcrops with large number of field boulders were preferred. For example, if we are actually, this is a general view. The field boulders that you see on the hilltop are actually megaliths. There are large number of megaliths amidst these field boulders, and the habitation is confined to the slopes as well as foothills of this low elevated landscape. This megalithic, these people were very specific with selection of selection of landscapes for their activities. This is understood, for example, by the evidence of this. On the left, this is a confluence location of river Kaveri and Harangi. This river on the left side is Harangi, on the right side is Kaveri. Now, what is there in this patch? I mean, in this extreme fringe of the confluence is the megalithic site. The dolmens are this larger area were once the site of dolmens, and now the dolmens are limited to the fringe of this location. So it tells us that how closely they were associated with the rivers, and since they were very much closely associated with rivers, river landscapes, the question is, were there possible impact of floods occurring on these channels? That has to be looked out in very detail, and some paleo-environmental data is there. But to connect with the archaeological context, we need further evidences. But to our understanding, these kind of extreme landscapes were also selected for the megalithic burials. Yeah, this is the view of Jenukallu Betta. Jenukallu Betta means a hill of honeycombs, where the local Kurubas probably were extracting honey from these regions. And the foothill is what Heggadehalli, K.K. Subbaiah excavated. When we went to the detailed transact surveys, we understood that there are multiple evidences and multiple sites in the environs, in the close environs. For example, at the hilltop in the granitic rock shelter, for example, is an rock shelter habitation site in the rock shelter context. M shows that megalithic sites that are evident. EM are excavated megalithic sites and habitation sites and different networks. From this, we can understand that spatially delineated multiple locations were used, and these multiple locations becoming a part of their activities. So these are all something that are closely associated with the core sites or the main sites. For possibly over the period of time, further expansion of population happened outside the core regions of the Iron Age or megalithic sites. Concentration of sites, when you look at the concentration of sites, there are a good number of sites that are away from the rivers of Kaveri and Harangi. Of course, when it comes to the west coast of Kaveri, the sites are closer to the river, whereas in the west bank, the sites are far away from the river channels. These are the plots of some of the megalithic sites, burial sites, habitation sites, and one of the habitation site here, where you see triangles, were excavated for the trial trenches to basically look into the stratigraphical sequence, natural sequence, as well as the if there is any occupational evidences. And this site on the surface, there is regular retrieval of ceramics, microliths, and slags. But nothing was found in the subsurface. When at the three locations when the megaliths were, at the three locations trial trenches were laid in the sections or in the trenches, no occupational evidences were found. If you look at the stratigraphy, composite stratigraphy of these trial trenches, it becomes very clear that the topmost deposition, about 2 meters, is clay, soil, and silt. These are the topmost layer. The bulk of the topmost layer is composed of the decomposed botanical remains, clay, wet clay, as well as silt. In the next, followed by this sequence, we will start getting quartz grains, quartz granules that are very sharper and decomposed, which has uh, which comes from the origin of being quartz vein of granite. So the lowermost layer is lowermost layer here. If you see the cursor, is completely a decomposed granite soil or granite. So no occupational evidences were found. It also tells us that the site formation in these regions is something that has to be still worked out, and it is very difficult to understand the site formations of the occupational evidences. The previous work has theorized that the occupational evidences of the Iron Age is flimsy, or since there was no intensive occupational activities occurred, so therefore there's a lack of occupational remains in the subsurface or in the settlement sites. But I think further research is required, which can disprove this understanding. This will be possible only when there is a thorough understanding of landscape formation in this region, and how within the landscape formation, how the site formation could have occurred. At the outset, due to the heavy rains and moist sediments, the ceramics that are found in this region, in the study area, are very fragile. Even if there is a surface treatment, it is very difficult to retrieve in the same condition, because the surface treatment on the ceramics would have been eroded, completely eroded. Very interestingly, microliths that you find of quartz here are sharper and not upgraded. So this context becomes very important to infer on the site formation and landscape formations in this regions. Now I'm just coming to the final slides of my talk. At the outset, what is the present view of the past? As I told you, there are a large number of megalithic sites in this study area, and the study area also has least populated hamlets. And people over here believe that megaliths are treasure troves, or there is a treasure inside a megalith. So they destroy, they open up, they destroy. Opening up this kind of burials for these reasons is nothing but as good as destruction. So the belief is that there is a treasure inside, but they are, every time they destroy, every time they open up, there is a disappointment, because there is no treasure. But they give us the people give us, wherever you find these destroyed burials, people give us very reliable information that when they opened up these burials, they found ceramics, and in the ceramics there were grains. People, to a certain extent, few people were able to identify that these grains belongs to ragi, because ragi is also a staple food currently in these regions. So this kind of archaeological data that they give is very important. From the north to the south, or east to the west of the Karp study area, the information that you get from the people from the disturbed burial is same and common. They will definitely find archaeobotanical remains, ceramics, and fragile iron traces, iron implement traces. There is another tradition where the people believe that dolmens are part of their current mortuary, as well as not exactly mortuary, are ritual practices, and these ritual practices can be linked with the mortuary as well as for the divine purpose. For example, if you look at the dolmen here, there is a small Shivalinga installed inside the dolmen, and in front of it there is Rangoli, a part of their daily puja, or part of their daily religious activities. So if you look deeper into understanding these kind of dolmens, it is understood that there are quite good number of dolmens which are part of their daily activities, whether it could be associated with the divinity or associated with the mortuary. Mortuary in the sense that the dolmens, they place a stone or a boulder or a kind of shaped or structured stones that are identical to some kind of images. So they become part of rituals during the post-death rituals. They, the dolmens are erected, they bring some stones and they install these stones in the memory of their dead. That is one part. The other part is, another side is, they will install a divinity itself, for example, the Shivalinga or Basava, many others. This is, I think, the later kind of practices is common in southern India. Yeah, in this case, this is what I was speaking. This dolmen is not older in antiquity, it is recent, but it resembles the dolmen where the uprights are boulders, and above the uprights are capstone. Here they bring some stones, naturally available stones, which has characteristic features. They will imagine certain shape on the stones and they will worship, and they represent their dead members. Yeah. This is the extreme version of the erection of a structure like dolmens, where multiple uprights, multiple capstones are erected, and it is also closed by a passage. Now, inside what we find is the characterized kind of stones. Here, what is one more peculiar thing is that, for example, if you look at the second one from the top, it looks like an axe, but it's very difficult to say. We didn't go to examine these materials because there were some restrictions from the localites, and we respect that. Instead of touching and lifting them, respecting their beliefs and cultural values are more important than examining the material. Okay, so the Coorg Plateau, there are, by this we were able to understand that Coorg Plateau has number of sites, and in the study area there were certain paleo environmental studies. In 2010, Kale and team from Pune, they studied a section of Kaveri, which is 20 kilometers upstream to the study area. That means the 20 kilometers upstream to the study area is where the river is, the discharge and energy of river is somewhat relatively higher, and it is cutting across the valleys. Now, what is understood from this paleo flood records is that there were 6 discrete Holocene floods occurring during 8000 BCE to 2000 BCE. 8000 to 2000 before, 1000 years ago. So 2000 years ago is definitely contemporary to the Iron Age sites and megalithic sites in the region. And I was mentioning you that we have 2 patterns. On the west coast, on the west bank of the Kaveri, the sites are closer to the river, and some sites are immediately on the bank of the river. Whereas in the east bank of the Kaveri, the sites are away from the river. We are not sure about the dates of the megaliths on the east bank or the west bank, if it is possible or logical to analyze, but we don't have sites. But what we can understand from this repeated flash floods during 8000 to 2000 kilo years is that there was recurrent flash floods, and it was because of the discrete precipitation that was occurring. Extreme humidity, extreme precipitation says that there were recurrent flash floods. Even if you look at in the previous year, there were flash floods in this region as well as in Kerala as well. So this is something the OSL dates and the paleo flood records helps us. It's not definitive, but it's definitely help us that the megalithic people who lived in this region probably were witnessing. We don't know the impact of the floods, but still probably they have witnessed these flash floods. So even if you look at the recent flood events right from the last 100 years, and we are all witness to the recent floods happened in the Coorg Plateau, not in the Wayanad, Coorg Plateau and the regions of Kerala. So here also similar, I mean, the effects, we can understand the effects. The effects can't be same or may not be the same. Even the recent records tells us that the recurrent floods are common. By looking at this paleo floods and paleo environmental context, I remember somewhere reading on the tribes of Coorg, tribes and castes of the Coorg book, where there is a saying in the region that once in 60 years, the bamboo has to dry. Once in 70 years, there is water scarcity. It's a saying. It's a saying. It is a saying that once in 60 years, the bene or the grasslands and the bamboo scrubs that are there in the region, which is natural and common in this Coorg Plateau, they have to get into a cycle of they have to enter into a cycle, and once in 60 years. So once in 70 years, there is certain indications on the climatic and hydrological changes. Probably this saying has come out of the understanding of people recently, not so recently, but at least before the drafting of this book 150 years ago. Yeah, so to a broader understanding, Coorg Plateau, if you look at the surrounding regions, 100 kilometers south or north or in the northeast, there are definitely iron deposits. Now, iron deposits, for example, about 100 kilometers north is where today where Kudremukh iron or iron mining company is there, and it is part of Baba Budangan supergroup formations. About 100 kilometer northeast, we have schist and darwars in the regions of Chitradurga and Chitradurga to Hiriyuru, particularly where there are iron deposits. 100 kilometers south in the Nilgiris, we have schist granulites, iron deposits in the form of granulites, and schist iron deposits in the form of schist. And further in the range of Satyamangalam forest here, there are iron deposits. So this says that, and in addition to that, crossing over the Coorg Plateau further west, entering into the coastal premises, there we have laterites, and laterite is also one of the source for the iron mineral extractions. So there is abundant iron deposition, but the question is, were they extracting, were they aware of it, or what was the source of iron objects, which are very much common in this megalithic burials, has its source from? Where did they bring iron? And this is something that is a common question that goes into many of the megalithic regional discussions. Probably the future works will have to work on these lines. So there are, as a looking at the landscape settlement pattern and the kind of nature of sites in the Koppar Archaeological Research Project, it is understood that water collection and management was fluctuating depending upon the monsoon precipitation, and it is not sure whether they depended on the streams and the rivers, streams or rivers in particular, like that of the Iron Age sites in the semi-arid regions or the northern Karnataka. So here, I don't think these people have to depend on the river channels, main river channels for water, but because these regions receive higher precipitation area, there are valleys, artificial pools or artificial rivers, reservoirs in the form of mud embankment would have helped these people to collect water. And remember, these people have shown both wet crops and dry crops. And there is probably a frequent shift in the riverine regions, from the non-riverines to the riverine regions, and surrounding the natural springs in shaping the site economy. But to what extent, what was the frequency of the shifts, we don't know when we look at the paleo flood records. What I am very curious about is that when it comes to the Iron Age sites in the semi-arid regions, where the granitic hills gives rock shelters, natural rock shelters and caves, That kind of rock shelters and caves are not uh, as much as evident in the Western Ghats. Hardly we find rock shelters, natural rock shelters in the hills of the Western Ghats or the Coorg Plateau. So probably, where did these people live when the people in semi-arid regions can live in the rock shelters, because rock shelters have shown occupational evidences. But where these people could live in the rock, how these people might have lived, because there are no rock shelters and there are jungles, there are open scrubs, open forests. So therefore, there is the way they habitated in this region is something that has to be seriously looked in the future. Apart from hardly one or two sites in the Karp region has rock shelters, and out of two rock shelter sites in Karp region, only one rock shelter showed the occupational evidences. So there are a lot of differences in the kind of people lived. Iron Age people in the semi-arid regions, they were very much into rock art production. They were very much into associated with the rock shelter activities. So these are all not found, or on the other hand, these landscapes are not probably not very suitable for these kind of activities. Uh, so therefore, there is lot of data that should come from the Coorg Plateau, and definitely the data will be dissimilar to the if you are comparing to the other climatic region, the sites from this climatic region will definitely show a dissimilarity. So I will stop with one observation, at one final observation in this talk, is that we all are aware about the archaeology of Kaveri Basin. The lower Kaveri Basin of Tamil Nadu, right from the Coimbatore to the east coast, there are no doubt a large number of sites. Even if you look at the recent works of Professor Rajan, including Selvakumar and others, there are a large number of Iron Age sites and early historic sites. When it comes to the middle reaches of the Kaveri, where the regions south of Coimbatore, such as the regions of Chamarajanagara, Biligiri Rangana Hills, Satyamangalam Forest, these regions in the middle reaches of the Kaveri, I don't think there are much sites. One site that is reported, two sites that comes reported is T. Narsipura, and one is adjoining site to T. Narsipura locality is the Neolithic and Iron Age site, and that is very much closer to the upper reaches of Kaveri. So middle reaches of Kaveri, the archaeology in middle reaches of Kaveri is not in the limelight, or it is very difficult to say. Probably there are no sites belonging to this period, or possibly future works may bring in. But currently, to the best of my understanding, middle reaches of Kaveri, there are no sites. Whereas when you come to the upper reaches of Kaveri, the Coorg Plateau and the Mysore Plateau, including the Mysore Plateau, there are large number of megalithic sites. So there are various dimensions to work on this region. So one of the dimension, including landscape, settlements, tropical climate, paleo flood records. There is another perspective to look into the Kaveri River that flows for almost 800 kilometers, which has about 80,000 square kilometer of catchment regions. So archaeology of Kaveri is very, very crucial, and particularly the upper reaches of Kaveri is where there is bulk of data yet to see the light. Thank you.